David, my love, my husband, my partner, you know, you're back having another conversation in this series. For anyone who's listened to All Things Conflict regularly, then you'll know that David has done two previous episodes in each of the other series. And, we do everything together and we talk about life, the universe, the immediate stuff, the bigger picture together. And so, to run this podcast and not include my husband in it would be, like not putting salt and vinegar on the chips. So, David, welcome back.
Thank you.
And it's funny that we're doing this on Zoom and you're in the room next door. But such is the technology. So, as you know, this series is called Justice Redesigned. And we've had many and deep conversations about varied topics about social welfare, about the prisons, about statutory services, about government, and in thinking about this series, it really was, not some big rant about how bad everything is. It was the fact that we need to realise that life is complex, that there are many complicated things to consider, and that government cannot do it all. No matter what the political promises are, government is not going to be able to do it all. It can't do it all. It needs to be more honest about that. But rather than complain about that, and rather than talk to politicians and policymakers, what I wanted to do was talk to people that actually are doing something, that they're putting something out in the world, that even if it makes the tiniest of difference, they are making a difference. So with that, I'd love you to talk about, in response to what I've just said, what's alive in you?
Okay, thanks. I think at the heart of, you know, I can only speak from my own world experiences, such as they are, or or what I remember. Um, so for me, the work we do has at the core of it an understanding that what we would like to do is to help reduce human suffering. Um, and I think if we're talking about social justice, as you say, it's very tempting to wander off into social injustice. And are we talking about it, and how we talk? Are we talking about it from the head, from institutional? Are we talking about it from the heart? So in the world I live, we try and filter through the heart as the leading voice. And I think if I, again, I'm going to be quite micro probably about this, but if I think about my interpretation, if we live in a world, in the world I live in, or the world as I experience and understand it, generally has a basis that's run on competition, on many, many different levels, or the idea of competition, the idea of excellence, the idea of one thing or one person being better than another, and striving for a future focus of ideals and heroes. And I think for me, if I look at the world through that lens, I'm not sure that the concept of social justice can even begin. Okay, so I see that as a bar or a shadow, whether it's institutionally, whether it's religious, political. The basic starting point is at odds with the very subject, if we want to talk from our humanity. Yes, we've developed a lot of things called ethics and morals, to try and help our hearts understand, our heads understand what our heart tells us is fundamentally
That is so beautiful. We've
yes.
developed ethics and morals to help our head understand what our heart's been telling us all along. Oh, thank you.
Well, our hearts tell us all along it's just not fair. So for me, at the heart of social conscience, it's not justice is very subjective. What I can't tell you what the word even means. It's an idea. Wouldn't it be great if maybe something we strive for, or if I'm really honest with you, in many respects, waste a huge amount of time conceptualizing something that we could do. But that's again another lens you could use. So if I think a bit that way, which I often do, so I don't feel worldly. I don't feel there's much I can say or do that's going to make a lot of difference. If I'm honest, I can only decide what my world is going to be like and how I want to communicate and be with myself. So I think how I am with myself and my own life experiences, and I could argue that is deeply molded and I think ruled. I don't know what is ruled, but structured, I think, very much by family, by history, culture. So it's a very interesting landscape if you want to try and describe it, evaluate it, prove or disprove something, which this world of scientists does really like to do. Some empirical winning and losing of argument in debate. I'd like to put that aside. I think the only thing that we can decide, and truthfully, it depends what mood you're in. I had a very interesting conversation earlier this morning with a lady at the bank, and I said I'm going to apologise because I'm in a bad mood, and I'm going to pick up on a complaint because I'm in a bad mood. I wasn't very socially aware there. Does that make sense? So mood and how you feel and what's going on will depend how far you're accessing your balance and your fairness and your sense of how you're engaging and the quality of what effect you're having on the people in the world around you. So that's kind of how I thought about it. And I thought, well, the guiding light in that kind of area where we've got other structures that move us away that we might call domination culture. We tend to use another word, which is conscience. Conscience is that voice, and truthfully, whether it's through avoidance, evasion, trauma, tranquilizers, too much adrenaline, and particularly, I think the world we live in now, I'm not sure how much it goes into deep consciousness or deep conscience because there is so much to think about. There is, it's all moving so fast. But through the work we've done and the years we've done it, I've always believed one thing, and I've always seen one thing, that I've rarely, if ever, met a person that couldn't tell me what happened and where they really were in something. The question is, what's the delay between sitting with this discomfort, the grief, the reflection, and thinking, well, and sometimes it can be a very positive reflection. Actually, that was really good. I didn't really give it any credence. So I think we're often limited to the perception of that we're reduced to that conscience voice. And conscience is, for me, very much about a feeling that something wasn't quite right in some way. And it could end up being an action, a thought, a lens. Oh my God, I sat and said that then. Or I did that thinking about it now. So some of it is a way of learning. But I think that we are moving so fast that conscience is very is one way and maybe a short, it doesn't have as much consideration and time given to it, and maybe often is avoided for all the reasons I've explained before. But I think that's where our kind of fairness button sits in. It's our how far will I go? And as I said, I think we can all have great ideals and thoughts and dialogue, but I do really wonder if what it really comes down to is how do we conduct ourselves on a given day in a given moment. So I'm wondering, just that's my landscape for this when I thought about it.
Mm.
Um, and then if I use that lens, it's really interesting to notice that how my mood will affect how generous or how much I care. If my need for satisfaction or safety or care isn't being met, then I haven't got much resource in that moment to give it to anyone else. You with me?
So I'm getting really, I think this is a really great starting point because, we think of justice, the justice system, justice as something that's meted out or a system that, decides things. And actually, you're starting from a different place. If we think about the scales of justice, justice is represented by balance, isn't it? And if I've understood you, um, then what you're really wanting to communicate is the scales of justice start inside us.
If every person had the capacity, capability, and desire on any given day to really sit with their real desire to connect, be together, be generous, be abundant, enjoy their world, and actually just did that on a daily thing, everything else would shift because it would have to.
But
And
isn't that easy to say when, where the next meal's coming from? We know that our shelter is, as safe as, I mean, nothing's completely safe, but we're relatively safe. And what about people for whom every day is a struggle to
well,
just feed the children?
here's the thing. How can I put this? The lives that we have, or the lives that we imagine that we want to have, are often built on our own internal emotional landscape, and that's been genetically passed through to us. So there are families that live for generations in crisis, and there are people who live in very different ways. There are people who live by the side of the railways in India who they've worked out have a higher quality of life and are happier than people that live on a smart street in New York. How are we looking at this? You see, if you're looking at justice as the distribution of wealth, well, that's one conversation. If we're looking at conscience and social justice as how we care for each other on a moment by moment basis, then the story that went before it isn't relevant, because that's where we use projection and judgment and look how they look. Oh, better be careful there. Oh, look, they're begging on the street, or I don't like the look on their face. So I think in this conversation, using perception of story again is another way of we self-protect ourselves. We live in these huge amounts of people moving around us and travel. So we don't have, I was, just to put it in perspective, I was watching something on YouTube the other day about different places people live. And they were talking about groups of people who live in Mongolia who spend their lives living in the country. So they live in yurts and they just keep moving around. And I was thinking, wow, that sense of freedom, that sense of safety, that lack of worry and ownership, all the things we could let go of. And I think that's what I'm trying to say here. How we are and how we perceive things is very much a measure of how we can engage and what we can offer. So because we're always in these kind of cages of how law, social, political life, social life, how we should behave. If you want to talk about, for me, a social justice, justice, it has to be how we connect and what we do for each other in the moment. And I'll give you a couple of funny examples. I don't know, however long we were going somewhere and I had to get rid of the car and And I thought, right, I'm going to have a beer. Right, I'm going to the shop. I'm going to buy myself a couple of beers. We're traveling tomorrow. And there was a guy on the street where I went and he had a broken foot and he was hissing and spitting and begging for money and whatever. And he didn't do it very well. He wasn't very good at what he did. But I had a look at him and I thought, you don't want money. I said, you need a drink. So I went to the thing and I bought 4 cans of beer. On the way out, I gave him 2. Well, he said to me, he said, I must apologize for the terrible things I just said about you. He said, I must have misjudged you. Because he wanted a couple of beers. And I felt really good about that. And he felt really good about that because that's where he got something he really wanted. Now, if you want to talk about social justice and social conscience, that was just one of those crazy fun. And I laughed about it because I thought, better be careful I thought I'll go and get him a bottle of scotch. Then I thought, well, he'll end up drunk on the street. What am I doing? But, social justice, social conscience, where are these limits? Does that make sense?
Well, that's a good example because, on the one hand, there'll be people listening to that going, well, you shouldn't have bought him any beer whatsoever. That was a really terrible misjudgment. There'll be other people saying, you should have just given him some money so he could have gone and stayed there. Everyone will have an opinion about that. And some people will just see the act of kindness and the fact that you did think, well, I'm not going to buy him a bottle of scotch because would be unintended consequences to that.
Yes, but here's the thing, really. You see, if we're talking about this socially, generally,
Yeah.
as a group, as people, I'm not expecting to solve the problem. It's not my responsibility to do everything. So I can do my bit and have my little thought. What do they call it? These planes of joining whatever we live in, of
Yeah.
divert, whatever. It's that, and if I do that and someone else gives them some money, and that was the way the society generally worked, then it is an inclusive there's not a lot to talk about. It's what moves you to do it. I'll give you a couple of other examples. It's just what moves you to do what's in your heart in that moment and be satisfied and glad with what you did. So in
Yeah,
that
and I
moment,
just want to hold on to, because I've got a few
yeah,
other questions about this, but
okay.
go ahead with a couple of
So,
examples.
just thinking along those lines, part of what we are involved in is working with charity shops, and I've been working with the managers. And it's really different. That when I came to meet them and talk to them over the years, I found that they have a very much sense of social justice or social conscience, which absolutely delighted me. I really was so pleased to hear
So
the
yeah, I
stories.
mean, I'm just delighted because, as an aside, our managers are just amazing human beings, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just a couple of things. So I was in one of the shops, and a guy comes to the door. He's got no clothes on. He's managed to find a plastic bag somewhere on the street to cover up his embarrassment, best way he could. And I watched the manager and how she dealt with him. And we sat him down. We talked him through. Was he okay? Should we call the police? And what had happened? But she got him clothes and got him in order and sat him down and helped him. But what I noticed is she charged him. So what was really interesting, the difference between her and me is she didn't charge him for everything, but she said to me, no, he's got to pay for something. So it was just interesting to see that was her, it's her, and I thought, I better keep my mouth shut. It's her shop, it's her judgment, it's her street, it's not mine. Okay. And she really did help him and he was there for a long time. But I just thought, I noticed, no, she had to take for her. She looked like he could afford it. He did have a credit card that he kept somehow. And he did pay for it quite willingly. A lot of it was given to him free. In another shop, um, there's an arrangement this manager has with certain people, where they borrow things. So there's a guy that comes in, unfortunately has a terminal illness, and he borrows DVDs. She makes no charge for that. Another manager, in fact, it was her, a lady. a lady came out one of the shops one day and she was saying, "Oh, what a lovely shop." I just happened to be walking by or walking in, I don't know. So I said, "Well, can you tell me what's so lovely about the shop?" She said, "Well, the manager." I said, "Well, what is it she did?" She said, "Well, my sister unfortunately is not well and she burned all my clothes. So she's given me some clothes." I thought, well, that's a nice thing to do. And then if I go, I'll give you just one other example. In another area, I was talking to a manager just last week, and because we were talking about the things we do and what else we could do and how we join things up. And she said, yes, she said, "I've noticed that people are hungry." She said, "It's not just the homeless." She said, "But the homeless now are really hungry." So with donations of food, I've been putting them aside and I've been giving them the food. So there's just a few, 3 or 4 different examples of where, if you want to call it. I look at that as you could call it the redistribution of wealth, you could call it social care, you could call it social conscience. It's how people value their are able. Yeah, I think I'll put it this way: is how they're able to live with themselves or do what they can in the world to feel that there is some help and fairness. They
Mm.
can't solve it, but they can
Yes.
do their little bit.
Well, I
And
think you've made the point really well, because when with the first story, I was going to jump to, but had we've created a world where somebody can be homeless, and and how are we going to solve that? And that is injustice, and food injustice, money injustice, injustice at all levels. And then as you explained the different stories, uh, to go down that route, I realised I would be missing the point, because the point you're bringing, there are a multitude of conversations we can have about justice. The point that you're bringing in this moment, in this podcast episode, is that we can all find some inner justice for ourselves and others in the very small acts that we can do moment by moment that make a difference.
I'm actually, I actually would like to put the idea that that is of greater importance.
Yes, I think that's what
Yes,
you're saying, is that we we
and
we
the
shouldn't
the
ignore that. In fact, we should balance the two things out.
I'm saying a little more than that. I'm saying,
Okay.
in my opinion, having worked in this area, which is very different from the world I came from, there is a natural human will that people curtail, reduce, and stop themselves naturally wanting to do these things because of a lot of the political, social conditioning and beliefs that are put upon them that they conform with to be part of groups. So there's one of the shops in particular that has a huge, sprawling, alive community that's growing and growing, and just those guys who they help. So when they're moving stuff in and out the shop, they come and give them a hand. No one asks them. They just right. So the natural reciprocity of life of humanity. If everyone could put aside a little bit of their fear of the propaganda of humanity, which COVID certainly didn't help. Um, and everyone really succumbed to their real, genuine desire to give and to join in. Things in the world would very quietly just settle down and move. And that's my supposition. And I'll put it just one other way in that as being a mediator. Um, in all the years, and no matter what or who I've spoken to, I haven't yet met anyone who didn't want to join in, be heard, feel that they got heard, were part of something, and offer something. I just haven't seen it.
Mm.
I mean, and I do mean not once. And
But that's what we talk about our work,
that,
isn't it? We
yeah,
create the conditions in which people can do that very thing, which is you put it really well, succumb to our actual inner desire to join in and to contribute. And
yeah.
we all
So,
have that inner desire, but the stresses and pressures of
well,
life and the systems that we live
it's not.
under.
I don't believe it's the pressures. It's the conditioning. it is the way we're educated, the way we're taught, what the current belief system is, and that shifts and changes. Um, and how can I put it? I honestly do believe that everyone wants to give something to the person on the street or wants to join in, but they'll always give you a reason. So as we say, like as mediators, no such answer as no, which just means there's something getting in the way right now, a reason why I can't join, or I had an experience I need to talk about, or not just yet. Um, and I think it's the same thing. I think it's like everything. It's people giving themselves permission to to help themselves. The act of giving and receiving, the part of human giving, and there are lots of other cultures that it's at the foremost that you give service to your community. We are, the world I see around me is taught not to give service. In fact, because of a lot of other imbalances, people are so, what they're actually doing is they're holding themselves and protecting themselves, saying, I'm wounded, I'm hurt, I can't. It's the condition they're in, and the wounds and the hurt that they're carrying, that they use their heads to try and use adaptive behaviors or language or work or money or whatever it is to try and help themselves feel better. But they're actually self-imposed. They're actually educated in and self-imposed. And in the
So I
moment,
have
if
a
I
hard
was, if
time. So I
yeah,
do want to jump in here. I
yeah,
have a hard time with hearing it's self-imposed. And I have a hard time because we went to a place called school. You know, most of us go to a mainstream school in our society. And from the get go, everything is the individual agenda.
yeah,
Everything is you are in school to pass some exams, to learn your subjects, to pass tests. I mean, you know, the amount we test children is just ridiculous, right? I mean, ridiculous. Um, and so we put children on a track to pass tests, to pass exams, to please adults, to work for extrinsic rewards. And we don't explain that's what we're doing. So that track is for a child who doesn't have any other context, is the way the world works. So I don't see it as self-imposed, David. I see it as, you use the word conditioning, I use
yeah.
the word, it's an indoctrination for
Okay.
which most people are not awake to. And I'd just love you to stay there and respond to that.
Yeah, I will respond to. I'm quite happy to take the feedback. I take the point. I think what I'm saying is that once we would be able to have this conversation with anybody,
Right, right, yes.
yes, from that moment on, I am absolutely as certain as I am talking to you now that every single person would do something different.
Well, we would be
Yeah.
in a position to make better quality choices. That's the way I put it.
Um, I think you again. I want to move away from choice. I want to move away. Why? What? For what reason do we give or receive anything? We do it because we want it. We're in a sense of play and wonder and generosity. So my point is actually, I think people actually suffer a harm by not following what they would love to do in that moment. And there's many times I've been around. It's like I've been around. Like I thought I've got no money in my pocket. How did I walk out with no? When I know I'm going to come across people here and there that I would normally give some money. Well, I was somewhere else. I was so I think that there's how aware we are as to how and what's going on for us. I'm saying that if we were able to have this conversation regularly, it would naturally, what would happen is that moment of whether it's conscious or subconscious or just it's the cathartic release of course there's a part that will call because we're human, that's what humans do. It's not dependent on whether you're X, Y, or Z or whatever analysis you want to or label you want to give yourself. People just want to, it's a natural thing to do. It's not a conversation, it's not a consideration, and it's not actually a subject.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm trying to say. If we can filter through all the things and give out the right information, and I've just thought I live in a world at the moment where I see a huge amount of this, where people come in, join in, become part of something we're doing, and then it's amazing it's just amazing to watch. And I think all the other systems, and I don't believe in history because no one ever learned anything from it, so I can't see the point of it other than trying to work out who's more powerful in the moment or what the cycle of powers might turn out to be. Um, it's the only thing we actually really have is the moment. And if in the moment we can create the conditions of just being able to give to somebody else, if it's a pound, if it's a tin of beans, if it's a smile, if it's how are you, and actually realize that's our. There's nothing other than usual in that. But we've managed to put everything into science, into a box. You smile, then you respond there, you do that there. This theatre of manners is existential. I think that's the
Okay.
word. It's
Well,
existential.
I'm just gonna, and I, who knows if whether this will get edited out or not, David. We'll decide that later. And when I heard you say, "Oh, history," and I don't believe in it, and whatever, and um, and I must admit, I used to think like that myself. But we have an amazing son-in-law who is a history professor,
And yet he
and
doesn't like my point of view. That's true.
I don't think that's fair. Um, I really would like to bring him into such a conversation because I have to tell you, I've learned a huge amount from. I mean, if you just say, it's that whole thing. If you just say history or maths or whatever, and you don't like it, it's a bit pejorative because when I listen to him and how he's using history, how he's interpreted it, and telling me some stuff about the research that he's recently done, I think it was on the bubonic plague or something. Um, I learned a huge amount about what we can get from this. So we're focusing on the inner balance. I'm just going to keep using the scales, finding that inside ourselves, the small acts of joining in and generosity that we can do that show that interaction, that human social interaction of justice in action in a moment by moment basis.
Yeah, and I
And you've
think
given some really good examples. So I like to just stay there for a minute, David, because this
okay.
is very different to some of
Okay,
the other
I'll come back on
interviews.
topic. So I'll put it one other way. The difference between empathy and sympathy. Okay. Yeah. Um, Sympathy in a very charitable way, in my opinion, is a separate. Whilst I'm not negating what it does and it's saying it should stop, there's a difference between what I call charitable sympathy and just having empathy. And I'm saying that in if you really, for me, if things really were the mechanism by which change might happen, I believe is more likely to be sustainable and long term and happen because all the models that we are using currently have turned a repeat in history. Let's put it that way. And that's what I mean. Nothing's really changed. There are still poor people. The lovely lady we met in New York with the soup kitchen said, "My aim is to shut this down so there's no more people living on the street." We haven't yet, as in on the other side of this field, developed or agreed that we need to shift more over here. And if we're not going to be able to do it politically by voting or whatever other means, and we don't want to go to war, which is the other way I'm afraid humanity does it, um, then just the language and the actions of the natural wanting to give of the heart that everyone has is so rewarding and so feeding. And it's not done with an expectation that it's an exchange or a deal. I think that's what I'm really saying.
Mm.
In all the other things, there's always some kind of deal, exchange, expectation, impact, or reporting or assigning or measuring. It's the wrong package to look at what I'm talking about. It's just one of the. It's like breathing. We don't negotiate breathing.
Mm.
We don't negotiate the concept or the idea of love or being in love. We just don't.
Mm. Yeah, thank you. Well, look, this is
So just one other thing. So in different cultures. the belief systems of giving and receiving and joining in. And another thing really interesting in the world that we live in and the borough we live in, there are so many different cultures. And in the people that we work with in the shops, it's really interesting to see all the different cultural differences in giving and
Mm,
expectation of actually that's what we just do it. It's
mm,
not, you know. And then, funny enough, there's the other side of that, which is the only thing I do jibe the managers for, is they're giving, giving, giving. I go and I say, well, can we have a cup of tea? Oh no, we don't have tea. So well, how do you not give yourself a cup of tea so we can deny ourselves things?
mm.
You
Well,
with me?
that's
It's
the truth,
balance,
isn't
you
it?
know.
That giving, well, that's why I keep using the scales, is because we have to give to ourselves as well. We
Absolutely.
must, that's our responsibility, isn't it? To give to ourselves, to show up in the world um, as resourced as our social situation allows.
Yeah, and my weapon for people not being able to give to themselves is that they get a cake allowance, whether they like it or not. They get cake every time it's delivered to them, and they enjoy it. That's my that's my balance.
Case allowance.
They get a cake. I didn't know what else to do. I got fed up asking for a cup of tea, so I sent them the cake.
Amazing, David. How wonderful. So, look, you and I can talk for hours, obviously, and as things go along, perhaps we'll let people further into some of our conversations. Maybe we'll do an edited highlights thing or whatever, the director's cut.
No, yeah, the unedited highlights, you mean?
um, but look, I've got a surprise question, which I've
Okay.
asked everyone in this series, which is, if I were to give you the keys to the Ministry of Justice and you could change one thing immediately, what would you change?
Well, the idea of ministry and the idea of justice are interesting talking points to begin with. Um, if I is if I was given the keys, control, power, um,
No, I'm not
I,
giving you any control or power, David. Easy, Tiger. Easy. You can just change one thing. What are
okay,
you going to
you sure?
change?
Yes, that's the one thing I want to change. That's what I want. That's it. I want control. I want power over. If I could change one thing, um, I would I would review the the whole lens through which the organization works. And
Brilliant.
I would like everyone who works in it to be given 3 weeks off and a cup of tea and someone to talk to. I'd say thank you very much for doing this job for our society, which is a tough job and hard to, I guess, very hard to live with. And I'd like us to look at our customers and realize they may have got together in a very strange and maybe even undesirable way. But a lot of things and the way in which they've done things is highly creative and quite interesting, the method. So they have a different way of thinking and they look at rules rather differently often. So I would like you to help them and help themselves, because I think that the the uh, the population need to be able to pay for their own keep. And I do honestly believe if you took the level of intelligence, worldliness, and knowledge that sit in all those people, and you actually, for me, I'd create Clink Inc. and I would set up banks, insurance companies, and everything. I think they'd be highly successful. They could then pay for their own keep. We could then look at restoring a lot of the situations that have happened with them, and we call them their victims, of how that there can be proper restitution based on what the people want. It's not always money. And you could create a legacy where you're actually helping people learn. And I would send in teachers. They need teachers to help them learn how to put it together and assimilate information, and therefore build something that actually you don't need a prison. What you need is help in restoring all the different inner balances. And it would pay, and I would insist that no one could end their sentence without having paid for their keep and shown a profit. And that means for the police, Because if you want to go and smash a pub up, well, that's great, but you've got to, that policeman has the wages. So if you want to behave that way, pay for it. I mean, we have to do it in every other part of society. It's just fascinating that we fund it this way around. It's fascinating.
Wow, David, amazing. It's an interesting concept. I'd love to know what people think about that, but thank you. Thanks
Yeah.
for doing
Well,
this and
thanks for
having this
listening.
conversation. And yeah,
Can I come and knock on your door then?
only if you're bringing cake.
That's the deal.